Have you ever wondered how simple marks became the stories that shaped our world? Tonight, on the Sleepy Brain Dose, we drift through the calm history of writing, from ancient symbols to gentle words that still guide us today. Let your curiosity rest, let your mind slow, and stay with us until the end for this quiet journey of soft science. When you listen to this calm journey, you will gently discover how the invention of writing slowly transformed human life. You will notice how simple symbols, carved or drawn long ago, gradually became stories, laws, and memories that reached across generations. It is a story of rhythm, of soft marks on clay and stone, of patience, and of the gentle unfolding of human thought. You might allow yourself to feel the slowness of this story, as if each word is a steady breath, carrying you into a place of calm. The invention of writing is not only a historical fact, but also a reminder of safety, of the gentle darkness in which humans once sat, scratching lines by the light of fire, shaping a language that could remain even after the voice was silent. At the beginning, there were no alphabets, no neat letters, no fixed forms. There were only impressions, marks that suggested an idea. People pressed reeds into wet clay or carved with stone tools into wood or bone. These first shapes were not sentences in the way we know them. They were reminders, little anchors for memory. A symbol might represent a harvest, an offering, or a person. You can imagine how reassuring it felt to have a mark that would not vanish like breath on the air, but would stay, quietly waiting to be seen again. This early writing carried no rush, no urgency. It grew slowly, over centuries, as people learned that memory could be given shape outside the mind. It was a discovery that blended gentleness with necessity. When a harvest was counted, when a trade was made, when an offering was recorded, writing provided a rhythm of safety. In a world where memory could fade, marks on clay or stone offered steadiness. You may notice how natural it feels to rest in this thought. Writing began not as art or literature, but as calm record-keeping. A line of barley, a jar of oil, a number of sheep. These were the first entries in the long book of human writing. There was comfort in knowing that even if the night was long, even if the soft darkness of sleep took memory away, the marks would remain. Over time, these marks invited more meaning. People discovered that symbols could carry not only things, but also sounds, feelings, and stories. The rhythm of life became visible. Births and deaths, offerings and prayers, trades and journeys. Each mark was like a slow step, carrying humanity forward. Writing began to hold not only what people had, but also what they believed. It is gentle to reflect on this. Every letter you see today, every page you hold, is part of that long unfolding rhythm. The invention of writing is not one single moment, but a slow breathing process across cultures, carried by countless hands. Each stroke of a reed pen, each carving into stone, was like an exhale, soft and steady, offering knowledge to the future. The first scribes, though unknown to us, lived in this rhythm. They pressed marks into clay while the world outside moved in silence. Perhaps the soft sound of the reed pressing into wet clay echoed in the stillness like a heartbeat. Their task was slow, repetitive, calm, and yet filled with meaning. Without knowing it, they gave humanity a new form of memory, one that stretched beyond sleep, beyond death, into generations that would follow. When we speak of the invention of writing, we are also speaking of the invention of continuity. Oral stories, though beautiful, depended on the rhythm of voice, on the presence of memory. But writing created a gentle safety. It allowed the same story to be carried across time, with no need for perfect recall. This calm transfer gave humans a new kind of trust in the future. You may find it soothing to realize that writing, in its earliest form, was always physical. It was carved, pressed, scratched, painted. It had weight, texture, and presence. A clay tablet, when dried, could last thousands of years, waiting in silence. There is something reassuring about this endurance, as if each mark was made with the quiet awareness that it would outlive its maker. Think of how soft the shift must have felt, from a world where memory faded with the setting sun, to a world where memory could rest in clay, wood, or stone. It was as though human thought found a home outside the body. That home was steady, calm, and always present. Even when the people themselves had gone dot in the rhythm of this invention, there is no sudden jump, no sharp break. It is all slowness, unfolding with gentleness. One mark became two became a pattern became a system. Systems grew into scripts, and scripts into stories. At every step, there was the calm breath of human patience. Even today, when you look at letters on a page or on a screen, you are looking at the gentle descendants of those first marks. The soft darkness of ink, the rhythm of lines across a page, the safety of knowledge resting outside the mind, all of this comes from that first discovery. Writing carries within it the memory of clay tablets and stone carvings, of slowness and care. So as we begin this long journey through the invention of writing, you can let yourself feel the calm continuity of the story. There is no hurry, no pressure, only the gentle rhythm of marks that became symbols and symbols that became stories. And from here, our path moves softly toward the first great centers where writing grew, the river valleys of early civilizations, where clay, reeds, and patient hands gave the world its first written memory. Long before there were alphabets, long before the neat lines of ink on parchment or paper, there were simple marks. The earliest symbols did not appear suddenly, but unfolded slowly, like the rhythm of a breath. They were part of daily life, part of the way humans tried to capture and share what they saw. When you listen to this, you may notice how gentle that process sounds, not rushed, not forced, but steady, almost like the calm pace of nature itself. Some of the oldest known symbols are not yet writing as we would define it, but they are traces of thought. In caves across Europe, Asia, and Africa, people left not only paintings of animals and figures, but also repeated signs, dots, lines, handprints, spirals. These marks might have held meaning that we cannot fully recover. Still, their presence tells us that long before writing systems, humans were already reaching for a way to hold on to memory. You might find it soothing to reflect that every small mark carried intention, a gentle attempt to fix an idea outside the mind. One common form was the hand stencil. A person placed a hand on a cave wall and blew pigment around it, leaving behind the outline of the hand. The image is simple, yet powerful. It is not a sentence, yet it communicates. I was here. This was my presence. You could imagine the calm repetition of this act, hand after hand, layer upon layer. It is almost like a rhythm, a quiet pattern of belonging. In the soft darkness of the cave, such marks must have felt like anchors of safety. Other marks included sequences of dots or hash-like lines. Perhaps they were tallies, perhaps rituals, perhaps reminders. It is difficult to know for certain, but we can gently acknowledge that they were not random. They repeat across caves separated by distance and centuries, which suggests a rhythm of shared meaning. Easy to observe, and yet hard to translate, these early signs remind us that the desire to record preceded the ability to write. Over time, symbols became more complex. In some regions, people carved marks on bones, ivory, and shells. The famous tally sticks, pieces of bone or wood with notches, may have been used to count cycles, perhaps the moon, perhaps days of hunting, perhaps exchanges of goods. These notches were slow to make, carved carefully with stone tools. You might allow yourself to picture how gentle the motion was, each notch carrying patience and deliberation. The stick became not only an object, but also a rhythm of memory in other places. Archaeologists have found incised signs on pottery. The pot itself was useful, but the marks added another layer, a mark of ownership, a symbol of contents, or perhaps something sacred. Imagine the slow motion of a finger or tool drawing into soft clay before it hardened. The act was simple, but it transformed the vessel into a carrier of meaning. You may realize that these early symbols were part of a larger pattern. Humans trusted marks. They trusted that an idea, when given form, could last. This trust built slowly. At first, a dot or a handprint, then a notch, then a series of notches. Later, patterns of lines or curves that meant something shared. Each step was calm, steady, unhurried. When we think of symbols, it is worth remembering that they often held both practical and spiritual weight. A tally stick may have counted food, but it may also have carried ritual value. A painted sign on a cave wall may have recorded an event, but it may also have been part of a ceremony. These layers of meaning coexisted without contradiction. You can gently notice how natural it is for human beings to let one symbol carry many shades of thought. One of the earliest large collections of symbols comes from the caves at Lascaux, in France and Chauvet in southern Europe. Alongside the famous animal paintings, there are groups of dots, dashes, and geometric forms. Some scholars suggest they may represent calendars, seasonal markers, or storytelling cues. Even if we cannot know for certain, we can see the calm continuity. Humans were already encoding the rhythm of life, migrations, seasons, the cycle of birth and death, into patterns of signs. Further east, in China, archaeologists discovered carved signs on tortoise shells and bones, dating back thousands of years. Some of these are considered precursors to Chinese characters. The lines are simple, yet they already show the impulse to connect sound, meaning, and mark. The shells were often used in divination, which means the signs carried both record and ritual. You may reflect that the calm act of carving into bone was not only communication, but also a gesture toward the unknown, a way to make the invisible steady and visible in Central Europe. The Vinca symbols found on pottery fragments may date back 7,000 years. These marks, small, deliberate, repeated, are not yet fully understood. Some scholars believe they represent an early script. Others see them as proto-symbols, a step toward writing. Either way, they remind us that across many places, humans were slowly discovering the gentleness of marks that lasted beyond a single moment. What unites all these early symbols is their rhythm. They are repeated, patterned, deliberate. They are not random scratches, though to our eyes they may seem abstract. Their repetition across space and time tells us they mattered. You might take comfort in knowing that even if we cannot translate them today, the people who made them found safety and meaning in their presence. As we breathe slowly through this thought, it is helpful to remember that writing did not suddenly appear. It grew like a slow dawn, spreading from symbols toward scripts. The earliest marks were like the first faint light before sunrise, gentle, uncertain, yet already promising clarity. In this way, the story of writing is not a story of invention alone, but of gradual awakening. When we pause to notice these early marks, handprints, dots, notches, spirals, we can see them as the soft beginnings of literacy. They carried memory across nights, across seasons, across lives. Each symbol was a quiet bridge between the present and the future. You may find it calming to realize that even today, our signs, letters, numbers icons, continue the same rhythm. They are extensions of those first human impulses, drawn slowly, carefully, with trust. And as the centuries moved forward, symbols began to gather into systems. They became organized, standardized, more widely shared. The soft beginnings we see in caves and on bones prepared the way for the first true scripts of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. Just as breath leads naturally into another breath, the rhythm of early symbols flowed into the rhythm of early writing. As we move gently from the earliest symbols toward more structured forms, we arrive in Mesopotamia, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, human communities slowly transformed from small villages into cities, and with this growth came the need for records that were clear, lasting, and precise. You may notice how natural this progression feels. When life becomes more complex, the rhythm of memory must find a stronger vessel. In Mesopotamia, that vessel was clay. Clay was abundant, soft when wet, and durable once dried or baked. People could press reeds into its surface, leaving wedge-shaped impressions. This became cuneiform, one of the world's earliest writing systems. The marks were not pictures of objects anymore. They were abstract signs, arranged in patterns that carried both number and word. It is calming to reflect on how this shift marked a quiet revolution. Thought was no longer tied only to voice or to fleeting symbols, but could rest permanently in matter shaped by human hands. The earliest tablets recorded quantities: barley, sheep, oil, silver, all listed in neat rows of wedges. These were not yet poems or laws, but they were essential. A temple or a household needed to know how much food had been stored, how many animals were owned, how much was owed. You might see this as an early form of safety. Writing secured fairness, reduced disputes, and gave stability in the exchange of goods. Even if memory faltered, the tablet remained steady. Over time, the system expanded. The signs of cuneiform grew more numerous, capable of representing syllables as well as objects. With this came the possibility of names, contracts, and eventually stories. A tablet could tell not only what was counted, but also who owned it, who transferred it, and under what conditions. In this way, writing began to mirror the rhythm of society itself. Imagine a scribe sitting quietly with a damp clay tablet, reed stylus in hand. The motions are deliberate, unhurried. Each impression carries weight. There is no rush, for once the mark is pressed, it cannot be erased easily. The act demands focus, patience, and rhythm. You might sense the calm dignity in this practice. The tablet is small, but what it holds is larger than the moment. It holds trust, agreement, and continuity. By around 2500 BCE, cuneiform was firmly established. It was used not only for economy, but for administration, for literature, and for law. Among the most famous of these early legal texts is the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed centuries later on a stone stele. While the details of those laws were strict, sometimes severe, what matters in our calm reflection is the principle. Rules could be fixed in writing, visible to all, rather than shifting with memory. It was a step toward transparency, a rhythm of order. You may reflect that with writing, power changed its texture. A spoken decree could fade once the voice was gone, but a tablet or stone remained. Authority became less fleeting, more anchored. Writing, in this sense, was not only a tool of trade, but also of governance. It created continuity between ruler and people, between decision and enforcement. This continuity, though sometimes rigid, gave structure to societies that were growing ever larger. The Mesopotamian tablets also carried myths and hymns. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, was preserved in cuneiform. To read its lines today is to hear a faint echo of voices from over 4,000 years ago. The rhythm of the story, pressed into clay, has outlasted empires. You may find it soothing to realize that clay, so soft at first touch, became the gentle keeper of humanity's earliest stories. Cuneiform. Tablets were stored in archives, rooms filled with shells of clay. Some were fired in kilns, intentionally or by accident when buildings burned, which preserved them for millennia. Others hardened naturally in the sun. The result is that thousands of tablets survive to this day, silent witnesses to ancient life. Each one is modest in size, yet together they form a chorus of calm continuity. They tell us about trade, taxes, songs, prayers, dreams. It is worth considering how this archive, resting in soft darkness for centuries, carried knowledge forward without voice, without movement, simply by being. Training as a scribe required patience. Young students practiced on clay, repeating signs again and again until they could form them with precision. It was a slow education, shaped by discipline and rhythm. In a world where few could write, scribes held an honored role. They were the keepers of knowledge, bridging spoken word and lasting mark. You might quietly appreciate how this reflects a larger truth. Societies often rely on those who preserve memory, even if their work unfolds in silence. The use of cuneiform lasted for more than 3,000 years. Over that span, languages changed: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, yet the script adapted, flowing gently from one culture to the next. This adaptability is itself calming to notice. Writing systems are not rigid. They breathe, shift, and transform, just like the societies that carry them. From these tablets, we learn of the rhythm of daily life. Lists of workers, rations of food, shipments of grain. There is something soothing in their ordinariness. They are not all grand myths or laws. Many are simple records of people living, working, sharing. You may find comfort in knowing that what mattered to them, food, shelter, fairness, is not so different from what matters today. Writing, in this way, reveals the continuity of human concerns. The invention of cuneiform shows us that symbols can grow into language, and language into systems of thought. It was not an instant leap, but a slow unfolding, shaped by countless hands pressing reeds into clay. Each impression was like a breath, steady and deliberate. Together, they built the foundation of written culture. When you pause with this thought, you can feel the calm rhythm of history, from dots and handprints to wedges on clay, from memory held in voices to memory resting in matter. Writing became not only a record, but a promise. A promise that what was agreed, believed, or dreamed would not vanish with sleep, but would remain through time. And as Mesopotamia shaped the wedge script of cuneiform, another land, touched by the Nile, began to shape its own form of marks, the hieroglyphs of Egypt, where images of birds, eyes, and rivers carried a different rhythm of meaning. From the slow impressions of clay in Mesopotamia, our attention moves gently westward toward the banks of the Nile. In Egypt, another form of writing began to take shape, one that looked very different, yet carried the same calm intention of making memory last. While cuneiform relied on wedges pressed into soft clay, Egyptian hieroglyphs combined image and sound, blending art and record into a unified rhythm. You may notice how natural this variety feels. Human cultures, facing similar needs, discovered different but equally steady ways to give thought a visible form. Hieroglyphs are perhaps the most visually striking of all ancient scripts. Birds, eyes, rivers, tools, and human figures appeared as small, detailed pictures carved into stone, or painted on papyrus. At first sight, one might think they are only drawings, but their system was far more subtle. Some symbols represented entire words, others stood for sounds, and still others acted as determinatives, signs placed at the end of words to clarify meaning. It is soothing to realize that writing here was not only a matter of utility, but also of beauty. Shaped with patience and gentleness. The word hieroglyph itself comes from Greek, meaning sacred carving. In Egypt, writing was deeply connected to the sacred. Hieroglyphs appeared on temple walls, tombs, statues, and monuments. They recorded prayers, hymns, and offerings, but also royal decrees, achievements, and genealogies. Writing was not a casual act. It carried weight, reverence, and rhythm. You might quietly reflect on how this differs from our modern sense of everyday writing. For Egyptians, to write was also to preserve a soul, to anchor life in a form that outlasted death. Papyrus, made from reeds growing along the Nile, provided a lighter, more flexible medium than stone. Scribes, trained carefully over years, painted hieroglyphs with brushes, creating flowing texts that could be stored and carried. Papyrus allowed records of administration, letters, stories, and instructions to circulate beyond temples. The rhythm of writing extended into the rhythm of daily life. It is easy to observe how this expanded the role of writing from the monumental to the personal. From stone walls to household accounts, learning hieroglyphs was demanding. Hundreds of signs had to be memorized, each with different roles and contexts. Students practiced patiently, repeating characters until their hands moved with certainty. The process was slow, deliberate, and filled with discipline. Yet in that slowness lay steadiness. Scribes gained not only knowledge, but also respect, for they carried the power to preserve words beyond the breath that spoke them. You may find it calming to think of a young scribe dipping a brush into ink, copying line after line in the quiet of a school chamber, each stroke a small step into continuity. Hieroglyphs also revealed a flexible system. They could be read left to right, right to left, or top to bottom, depending on the orientation of the figures. The direction of the animals or people in the script guided the reader. This fluidity gave writing a living quality, almost like a river's flow. Worth considering is how naturally this suited Egyptian thought, which often joined the practical and the symbolic, the earthly and the eternal. The link between hieroglyphs and religion was profound. Egyptians believed that words carried power. To inscribe a name was to grant it endurance. To erase a name was to remove a person from existence. Thus, writing was not neutral. It was active, shaping memory itself. The walls of tombs carried long sequences of hieroglyphs, ensuring that prayers and rituals would continue for eternity. You may notice the gentleness of this idea. Writing as protection, as a way of guiding a soul safely through the journey beyond life. In addition to sacred texts, hieroglyphs recorded administration and economy. Grain harvests, tax records, labor assignments, all found their place in writing. This mirrored what had begun in Mesopotamia, yet with a different aesthetic. Where cuneiform favored abstraction, Egyptian writing favored image. Both, however, served the calm purpose of order and continuity. You can see here how writing adapts to culture, the same need met through different rhythms. Over time, hieroglyphs gave rise to simpler scripts, such as hieratic and later demotic, which were faster to write and suited to everyday use. These scripts flowed more easily across papyrus, yet they always carried the memory of their hieroglyphic roots. One might say they were softer echoes of the monumental carvings, tuned for the rhythm of administration and daily life. This reminds us that writing systems, like breath, can shift between depth and lightness depending on need. The artistry of hieroglyphs left a lasting impression. Even today, their shapes invite fascination. They speak to the human desire not only to record, but also to beautify, to let the written word carry grace as well as meaning. It is gentle to reflect that in every carved falcon or painted lotus, there was both communication and care. Writing here was never only functional. It was also an offering of patience. One of the remarkable aspects of hieroglyphs is their combination of sound and image. A single symbol could represent an idea, a syllable, or both. This layering made the script versatile, but also complex. You may find it meaningful to notice how this mirrors the layered nature of human experience. One gesture, one sign, can carry several shades of meaning at once. The Rosetta Stone, discovered much later, revealed the key to understanding hieroglyphs. It contained the same text in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, which allowed scholars in modern times to decipher the ancient script. Thanks to this, we now read hymns, letters, and records written thousands of years ago. The calm patience of the scribes who inscribed them is still with us, carried forward across millennia. What we learn from Egyptian writing is not only history, but also perspective. Writing was never separate from life, but part of its rhythm. It recorded trade, guided rituals, honored rulers, and carried prayers. Each sign was more than a mark. It was a small piece of the eternal. To write was to join the cycle of life and death with continuity. So when you think of hieroglyphs, you can let yourself rest in the thought that writing can be both practical and sacred, both precise and beautiful. It is a reminder that human expression does not always divide utility and art. Sometimes, as in Egypt, the two flow together. From the calm, carved figures along temple walls, the journey of writing continued to grow. In another part of the world, far to the east, people began carving into bones and shells, creating the early forms of Chinese script, a different rhythm, yet born of the same human impulse to let thought rest safely in marks that last. From the river valleys of Mesopotamia and the temples of Egypt, the story of writing flows eastward into the lands of ancient China. Here, too, humans found a way to let memory, belief, and record take shape in marks that endured. But the rhythm of Chinese writing was distinct, carrying with it a form of continuity that still echoes in the characters used today. You may notice how extraordinary it is that a script born more than 3,000 years ago still breathes in the present, adapting yet recognizable. The earliest widely accepted evidence of Chinese writing is found on oracle bones, shells of turtles, and the shoulder blades of oxen. These objects, fragile yet enduring, were used for divination during the Shang dynasty. Around 1200 BCE, a question would be inscribed onto the bone or shell with a sharp tool. Will the harvest be good? Should we make war? Will rain come? Then heat was applied until cracks formed, and diviners interpreted those patterns as answers. Alongside the cracks, the carved inscriptions recorded the question and sometimes the outcome. What remains today are thousands of fragments, silent yet eloquent, carrying the rhythm of human wonder and concern. The script on these bones is already complex. Hundreds of signs appear, many of which evolved into later Chinese characters. Some are pictographic, resembling the object they represent, a tree, a fish, the sun. Others are ideographic, expressing abstract concepts through form. Still others combine sound and meaning, showing that even at this early stage, writing had moved beyond simple pictures into a flexible system. It is worth considering how naturally human thought tends towards such layering, symbol, sound, and idea, woven together like threads in a fabric. You might find it calming to reflect on the setting of these inscriptions. In the quiet of ritual, with the slow crackle of heated bone, a scribe carved lines into the surface. The strokes were steady, deliberate, without haste. Each question, though urgent to those who asked, was set down in a rhythm of patience. And because those strokes were made on durable material, they remain with us today. The voices of the Shang people, their worries and hopes, are carried softly across more than 3,000 years. From oracle bones, the script spread to other materials, bronze vessels, jade, bamboo slips, and eventually silk and paper. Each surface shaped the rhythm of writing differently. Carving into bone required sharp pressure, leaving angular lines. Casting inscriptions into bronze allowed for more rounded, decorative forms. Writing on bamboo slips introduced vertical columns and brush strokes, which later became central to Chinese calligraphy. You may observe how writing is never separate from material. Each medium invites a different pace, a different touch dot. As centuries passed, the script developed into more standardized forms. The Zhou dynasty brought greater organization, with characters that were easier to reproduce. Later, the Qin dynasty, around 221 BCE, introduced the small seal script, a unification that allowed the empire to function with shared records. This was followed by the clerical script of the Han dynasty, with its flowing, rectilinear strokes, a style closer to modern characters. Through each stage, the script evolved slowly, but it never abandoned its roots. The connection between ancient oracle bone signs and contemporary writing is still visible, a calm continuity across millennia. One of the gentle qualities of Chinese writing is its emphasis on stroke order and balance. Each character is built of components, arranged with care. The act of writing becomes rhythmic, almost meditative, top to bottom, left to right, each stroke following a sequence. This order is not only practical for learning, but also aesthetic. It reflects a harmony between movement and form. You might quietly notice how this harmony mirrors broader themes in Chinese thought, where rhythm and balance are valued across art, philosophy, and life. Chinese characters carry both meaning and sound. Yet unlike alphabets, they are not limited to a fixed set of letters. Instead, thousands of characters exist, each with its own story. Some are simple, others complex, but together they create a vast landscape of signs. It is calming to realize that in such a system, every character is like a small world, a combination of image, sound, and history, condensed into strokes. The endurance of this script is remarkable. While cuneiform and hieroglyphs eventually fell silent, Chinese writing remained, adapting to new dynasties, new technologies, new eras. Part of its strength lies in its flexibility. Characters could shift shape, but their core identity stayed. Even today, one can trace modern forms back to their ancient ancestors. It is soothing to consider that a schoolchild learning characters in the present is joining a rhythm that stretches back thousands of years, unbroken. The oracle bones remind us that writing is not only about economy or law, but also about seeking guidance. The earliest inscriptions are questions, reaching beyond the known into uncertainty. Will the rains come? Will the harvest be safe? These are concerns that still live in human hearts, though we ask them differently now. You may find it gentle to reflect that writing began here, not only as record, but also as comfort, a way to feel connected to the unseen patterns of life. Archaeologists continue to study these bones, and each fragment reveals something new. Some inscriptions list royal lineages, others record sacrifices, still others describe eclipses or natural events. In their variety, they show a society deeply attentive to rhythm, the rhythm of time, of ancestors, of heaven and earth. Writing became the bridge that allowed those rhythms to be recognized, remembered, and shared in later centuries. Chinese writing grew into calligraphy, an art form as much as a script. The brush replaced the knife, and ink on silk or paper allowed for fluid, expressive lines. The act of writing itself became a practice of balance and calmness, valued not only for communication, but also for cultivating inner stillness. You might allow yourself to see how naturally writing can shift from record to art, from necessity to meditation. The Chinese script also shaped identity. Dynasties used it to unify vast territories. Scholars used it to preserve philosophy and history. Poets used it to capture fleeting feelings. Across all these uses, the script held steady, always carrying within it the memory of the oracle bones. Each modern character is, in a way, a softened echo of those ancient carvings, still whispering of questions asked by Firelight. So when we think of Chinese writing, we are reminded of continuity. From bone to bronze, from bamboo to paper, from oracle rituals to digital screens, the same system has carried human thought across time. It is a story of endurance, of patience, of rhythm. And in this calm unfolding, we see how the invention of writing is not only a matter of preserving data, but also of nourishing connection to ancestors, to nature, to the future. As we leave the oracle bones behind, we can feel the gentle bridge they created. From pictures carved in stone or clay, writing had become a living, flowing system. And far to the west, another people, the Phoenicians, would soon develop a simpler method, an alphabet of signs that captured sound directly, a system that would travel widely across the Mediterranean world. From the complex beauty of Chinese characters, the story of writing flows back toward the Mediterranean, where another form of script quietly reshaped the possibilities of human communication. In the coastal cities of the Phoenicians, traders, sailors, and artisans, a new system emerged. It was simpler than cuneiform, less ornate than hieroglyphs, more practical than long lists of symbols. It was an alphabet, a small set of signs that stood for sounds. You may notice how natural this shift feels. In cultures where trade moved quickly, clarity and speed became as valuable as sacredness and beauty. The Phoenicians lived along the eastern Mediterranean coast, in cities such as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. They were known for ships that crossed seas, carrying goods from one shore to another. In this rhythm of exchange, they needed a script that was easy to learn, quick to write, and adaptable to many languages. What they created was a set of around 22 symbols, each representing a consonant sound. Vowels were left unwritten, but the simplicity was powerful. Instead of hundreds or thousands of signs, one only had to learn a few dozen. It is worth considering how this reduction, though small in number, expanded possibilities. The alphabet was not art in the sense of hieroglyphs, nor ceremony in the sense of oracle bones. It was a tool, clear, portable, and practical. Yet in its very simplicity lay a profound calmness. A child could learn it more quickly. A trader could record agreements more easily. A sailor could mark goods without years of training. Writing no longer required the long apprenticeship of scribes. It began to open toward wider use. You might find it soothing to reflect on this quiet democratization, knowledge moving gently from the few to the many. The shapes of the letters were derived from earlier scripts, influenced by Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions. But the Phoenicians stripped away excess, leaving only essential strokes. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. These early names carried meanings, often linked to objects, yet the marks stood above all for sounds. This sound-based system meant that writing could reflect speech more directly. You may observe how naturally this mirrors the human desire for efficiency, to capture voice with fewer steps, to let language flow onto surface with less weight. Because the Phoenicians were traders, their script traveled. On ships laden with cedar, glass, or purple dye, the alphabet moved across the sea, to Cyprus, to Greece, to Italy, and beyond. Each culture that received it adapted the letters, reshaping them to fit local tongues. In this way, the Phoenician alphabet became a root system from which Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic would eventually grow. It is gentle to remember that from these small marks came the letters you are seeing now, the familiar shapes of our daily reading. The alphabet's strength was not only its simplicity, but also its adaptability. It could be carved into stone, written on papyrus, scratched onto pottery shards, or painted on walls. It fit into the rhythm of trade documents, contracts, inventories, and messages. Unlike monumental inscriptions, this writing was mobile, moving with goods, with sailors, with stories. You may quietly notice how naturally form follows function. In a world of motion, writing itself had to become lighter. The Phoenician alphabet also changed the rhythm of learning. Instead of years memorizing hundreds of signs, one could master the system more quickly. This did not mean that everyone could read and write, but the possibility widened. Merchants, artisans, and officials found it accessible. It lowered the threshold between spoken language and written mark. Worth reflecting on is how each simplification in human history often creates room for expansion. By making writing simpler, the Phoenicians allowed it to spread further. Though practical, the alphabet did not lack dignity. Inscriptions on temples, dedications, and monuments still carried weight. The letters, though plain compared to hieroglyphs, held meaning in their steadiness. They were not decorative pictures, but clear signals. You might allow yourself to appreciate the quiet strength of such clarity. Beauty, not in ornament, but in form that endures and serves. Archaeologists have found Phoenician inscriptions across the Mediterranean world. Each one is a reminder of how far sailors traveled, how many ports they visited, how widely ideas could move along with goods. The alphabet was like cargo itself, carried from city to city, exchanged, reshaped, and absorbed. In the soft rhythm of waves against ships, writing too was in motion. The influence of the Phoenician alphabet cannot be overstated. Without it, Greek letters might not have taken their familiar form. Without Greek, there would be no Latin alphabet as we know it. And without Latin, the scripts of much of the modern world would look entirely different. You may notice how calming it is to see continuity in this. The letters we use today are quiet descendants of marks first scratched by traders over 3,000 years ago. The simplicity of the Phoenician script also shows a broader truth. Complexity is not always strength. Sometimes, by letting go of excess, systems become more resilient. The alphabet's endurance lay not in detail, but in essence. Each sign carried a sound. Together, they carried speech. Nothing more was needed. This minimalism gave writing a flexibility that ornate scripts could not match. It is also gentle to reflect on how writing shifts with human need. In societies where ritual and permanence were central, scripts grew elaborate and sacred. In societies where trade and exchange dominated, scripts grew lighter, quicker, and more portable. Neither path was wrong. Each reflected the rhythm of life it served. You might find it calming to see how human culture, across places and times, always adapts its tools to its rhythms. From the Phoenician alphabet, new possibilities unfolded. Greece added vowels, giving writing greater precision. Rome later reshaped the letters, creating the Latin alphabet that would become the backbone of European languages. Hebrew and Arabic scripts also trace their roots back to this system. The quiet lines made by Phoenician hands became the foundation of much of human literacy. So, when you look at the letters around you, whether on a page, a sign, or a screen, it is worth pausing to think of those early traders. With reed or chisel, they drew simple marks, not ornate, not sacred, but clear. And in their clarity lay a future they could not have imagined. Billions of people, across centuries, using alphabets born from their simplicity. In the calm unfolding of writing's history, the Phoenician alphabet is a turning point. It reduced complexity, increased accessibility, and spread with the rhythm of trade. From this simplicity, whole civilizations drew their written voice. And as the alphabet carried across the sea, it found new homes, especially in Greece, where letters took on a form that would inspire philosophy, poetry, and science. From the seafaring Phoenicians, the alphabet traveled gently across the waters and arrived in Greece. There it was reshaped and refined, a quiet transformation that would echo far into the future. The Greeks added something new, something simple yet profound: vowels. With vowels, writing could mirror spoken language more closely, capturing its rhythm and clarity. You may notice how natural this change feels, as though writing itself wanted to breathe more fully, to take on the cadence of human voice. The Greek alphabet was not just a tool of trade. It became a vessel for thought, philosophy, and art. In Greece, letters carried poetry, plays, histories, and reflections on nature and the soul. They preserved the verses of Homer, the dialogues of Plato, the logic of Aristotle. It is soothing to reflect that without this alphabet, much of Western thought would have been carried only by voice, vulnerable to loss. Instead, through writing, it endured. Like a calm thread stretched across centuries. Greek inscriptions appear on stone, pottery, and papyrus. They range from simple dedications to long texts of law and literature. The letters themselves were steady and clear, written in straight lines, often without spaces between words. Reading demanded patience, but the rhythm of the text invited deep attention. You might find it calming to imagine the slow tracing of eyes across a continuous string of letters, each sign a small breath, guiding the reader into meaning. The Greek alphabet also fostered democracy. In Athens, laws and decrees were inscribed on stone steles placed in public spaces. Citizens could gather, read, and know the rules by which they were governed. Writing brought transparency, reducing reliance on memory or private authority. It is worth considering how this shifted the balance of power. What was written became stable, visible, and open to all who could read. The alphabet, in this way, supported the rhythm of shared civic life. Literature, too, found a lasting home in writing. The tragedies of Sophocles, the comedies of Aristophanes, the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, all carried forward through letters. Without the alphabet, these works might have faded like spoken wind. Instead, they remain with us, soft echoes of ancient voices. You may quietly reflect that even the most profound thoughts depend on simple marks, lines drawn steadily, repeating with calm rhythm across surfaces. As Greece gave shape to philosophy, Rome inherited the alphabet and reshaped it further. The Romans adapted the Greek letters into what we now call the Latin alphabet, the direct ancestor of the script used across much of the modern world. Latin writing carried the weight of law, empire, and administration. In this form, the alphabet became not only a vessel of poetry, but also a backbone of governance. Roman inscriptions cover monuments, arches, coins, and official documents. They recorded laws, treaties, and decrees. The 12 Tables, one of Rome's earliest sets of written laws, embodied the idea that justice should be fixed and accessible. You may notice how writing here again served safety. Citizens could know the rules, rather than depending on memory or hearsay. Letters carved into stone were steady, enduring beyond the lifespan of rulers or judges. The Latin alphabet was practical, flexible, and strong. It suited both grand inscriptions and everyday notes. On wax tablets, Romans wrote letters, school exercises, and accounts. On parchment, they copied literature and records. On stone, they preserved dedications and victories. This adaptability allowed the alphabet to flow into all parts of life, from the marketplace to the Senate, from private correspondence to imperial proclamations. Worth thinking about is how this versatility helped the script spread across Europe, eventually shaping languages as diverse as Italian, Spanish, French, German, and English. The aesthetic of Roman writing also reflected its values. Letters were angular, balanced, measured. They carried a sense of order, mirroring the rhythm of Roman law and architecture. You might allow yourself to see how form and culture resonate. The same steadiness that built roads and aqueducts also guided the shaping of letters. Writing became another expression of structure, discipline, and endurance. Education in Greece and Rome relied on letters. Children practiced alphabets on tablets, repeating them slowly, memorizing sequences, writing and rewriting. It was a steady rhythm, much like the learning of cuneiform in Mesopotamia or hieroglyphs in Egypt, but now with far fewer signs. This simplicity allowed broader access. You may find it gentle to reflect that the alphabet's openness supported not only trade and law, but also learning itself. In Rome, literacy spread through the army, through administration, through commerce. Soldiers carried written orders, merchants recorded contracts, officials kept archives. The alphabet wove itself into the daily rhythm of empire. It is calming to see how naturally writing becomes part of ordinary life, not only of monuments or sacred rituals. The alphabet, light and portable, moved wherever people moved. Philosophy and religion, too, found permanence through the alphabet. Early Christian texts were written in Greek and Latin, carried in letters that ensured their survival. Without the alphabet, the spread of these ideas would have been slower, more fragile. Instead, writing gave them a steady path. It is worth noticing how often the fate of thoughts depends not only on their content, but on the scripts that hold them. What makes the Greek and Roman alphabets so significant is not only their content, but their continuity. From Greek vowels to Roman structure, the alphabet became a foundation for later cultures. Today, when you read these words, you are tracing shapes that began in Phoenician trade, were refined in Greek philosophy, and solidified in Roman law. You may pause to feel the calm endurance of this line, unbroken for thousands of years. In their simplicity, alphabets proved stronger than complexity. While cuneiform and hieroglyphs eventually fell silent, the Latin alphabet continued, adapting through medieval manuscripts, printing presses, and digital screens. It is soothing to realize that the same basic shapes carved on Roman stone are still with us, flowing in the rhythm of modern text. So, as we rest with the thought of Greece and Rome, we can see how alphabets became more than signs. They became the quiet foundation of culture, carrying philosophy, poetry, law, and faith. Each letter, small and plain, was part of a vast continuity. And as Europe inherited this system, India was developing scripts of its own, shaped by the rhythm of Sanskrit and the needs of new traditions. As the Roman world carved laws into stone, and Greek thinkers wrote their reflections on papyrus, another stream of writing was flowing gently across South Asia. In India, the rhythms of language and spirituality found their form in scripts that carried Sanskrit, Prakrit, and later many regional tongues. These systems of writing did not simply record trade or law. They also preserved hymns, philosophies, and teachings that shaped civilizations. You may notice how naturally writing adapts to the needs of each culture, becoming not only a tool, but also a vessel of spirit. Sanskrit is often called a perfected language, structured with clarity and balance. For centuries, it was transmitted orally, recited in rhythm, and memorized by heart. Priests and scholars repeated verses with precision, ensuring their continuity without written aid. When writing joined this tradition, it became a gentle reinforcement, another way to secure what had long been carried in memory. It is calming to reflect that writing here did not replace voice, but rather flowed alongside it, adding another layer of steadiness. The earliest scripts in India include Brahmi and Kharosthi, appearing around the 3rd century BCE. Brahmi, in particular, is considered the ancestor of many South and Southeast Asian scripts. Its characters were simple and angular, suited to carving on stone and writing on palm leaves. Inscriptions of Emperor Ashoka, spread across his vast empire, are among the earliest major examples. They record edicts promoting moral conduct, compassion, and respect for all beings. Worth thinking about is how writing here became a bridge between ruler and people, carrying not only commands, but also gentle encouragements toward ethical living. Kharosthi, used in the Northwest, was influenced by Aramaic and suited to trade routes linking India with Central Asia. Written from right to left, it shows how scripts adapt to geography and exchange. Eventually, Brahmi grew dominant, evolving into diverse regional scripts such as Devanagari, Tamil, Kannada, Bengali, and many others. You might quietly observe how one system of marks branched into many, like a tree spreading roots and leaves across centuries. Devanagari, used widely for Sanskrit today, carries a distinctive horizontal line across the top of its characters. Each letter hangs from this line, giving the script a calm sense of balance. When seen in manuscripts, the steady rhythm of strokes and connecting lines feels almost like a visual mantra. You may find it soothing to reflect that even the appearance of letters can mirror the philosophy they carry. In this case, harmony, order, and flow. Writing in India was often linked with sacred texts. The Vedas, Upanishads, epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, and countless commentaries were eventually set down in script. Yet oral recitation remained central. The written page was a companion to the voice, not its replacement. This dual rhythm, memory and mark, gave Indian culture a special resilience. If one form was lost, the other endured. It is gentle to recognize how safety was built into this balance. Palm leaf manuscripts became common, especially in southern and eastern India. Scribes inscribed letters with a stylus, then rubbed ink into the grooves to make them visible. The leaves were strung together with cords, forming long, horizontal books. Fragile though they seem, many have lasted for centuries. The slow, deliberate work of inscribing each line, leaf by leaf, gave writing a meditative rhythm. You might notice how naturally this practice connected learning with patience. Writing also played a role in administration. Records of land, taxes, and trade were kept, ensuring stability for kingdoms and merchants. But unlike in Mesopotamia or Rome, where law and economy dominated, Indian scripts carried just as much weight in spiritual and philosophical transmission. Sutras, treatises, and poems filled the manuscripts. In their calm unfolding, writing became a path for both practical governance and inner exploration. Buddhism, Jainism, and later Hindu traditions all used writing to preserve teachings. Buddhist sutras spread across Asia, were copied in Brahmi-derived scripts and translated into many languages. The written word carried ideas across mountains and seas, linking cultures in gentle dialogue. You may find it meaningful to reflect that writing here was not only a record, but also a traveler, quietly expanding the reach of compassion and thought. In Indian tradition, sound itself was sacred. The vibration of a syllable, the recitation of a mantra, was believed to shape reality. Writing, therefore, was more than representation. It was a visible form of sound. To inscribe a syllable was to give it permanence, to let the vibration rest quietly on a surface. Worth noticing is how this differs from other cultures. Here, letters were not only tools, but also embodiments of spiritual power. As centuries passed, Indian scripts diversified further. Devanagari shaped the writing of Sanskrit, Hindi, and Marathi. Tamil and other Dravidian scripts grew with their own rhythm, preserving rich literatures. Bengali, Gujarati, and others flourished in the East and West. Each script carried the same ancestry, yet developed its own style, adapted to local speech and needs. You might reflect on how gently diversity arises when culture and geography shape letters over time. The influence of Indian scripts extended beyond the subcontinent. In Southeast Asia, scripts like Khmer, Thai, Burmese, and Javanese grew from Brahmi roots. Temples in Cambodia and Indonesia preserve inscriptions that still show their Indian heritage. Writing here was part of a broader cultural exchange, moving along with trade, religion, and art. It is calming to think of how letters themselves can be travelers, crossing borders softly, leaving quiet traces in new lands. In the medieval period, manuscripts flourished in monasteries and universities like Nalanda. Scholars copied texts on philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The act of writing was steady, communal, and enduring. Even when invasions or fires destroyed centers of learning, fragments survived, carried by travelers, hidden in caves, or preserved in distant libraries. This reminds us gently that writing, though fragile, has resilience when many hands carry it forward. The Sanskrit writing systems also played a role in shaping identity. To know letters was to join a community of learning, to enter a lineage of knowledge. But even those who could not read directly were touched by writing, as texts guided rituals, stories, and laws. The script was both exclusive and inclusive in its training, inclusive in its influence. You may notice how naturally writing creates circles of connection, radiating out from the scribe to the wider world. The rhythm of Indian scripts, with their flowing curves and steady lines, carries a sense of continuity that feels timeless. Each letter is a gesture of both practicality and devotion. From the carving of Ashoka's edicts on stone pillars to the careful copying of palm leaf sutras, the practice of writing was slow, calm, and filled with purpose. So, as we think of India and Sanskrit writing systems, we can see how letters became more than marks. They became carriers of both worldly order and spiritual insight, linking kingdoms, guiding rituals, and nourishing philosophies. Writing here was not only about record. It was about resonance, the gentle echo of sound in visible form. And as these scripts spread outward into neighboring lands, they joined the wider rhythm of world writing, connecting with other traditions that carried their own paths of continuity. From the palm leaf manuscripts of India, the story of writing carries us across oceans once more, toward the distant lands of the Americas, where the Maya and other peoples developed scripts of their own, complex, beautiful, and filled with rhythm. While alphabets spread across Europe and scripts blossomed in Asia, far across the ocean, in the lands we now call Mesoamerica, writing was unfolding in another rhythm. Independent of Egypt, Mesopotamia, or China, The peoples of the Americas created systems of their own, tailored to their landscapes, beliefs, and histories. The Maya, the Aztec, and others left marks that still speak today. You may notice how gently this reminds us that human creativity does not flow from a single source, but rises in many places, like springs bubbling up from the earth. The Maya, living in the dense forests of present-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, developed one of the most intricate writing systems of the ancient world. Their script, known as Maya glyphs, combined logograms, signs for whole words, with syllabic signs for sounds. This mixture allowed them to record speech with flexibility and precision. At first glance, the glyphs look like small works of art, full of curves and faces, but each had a specific role. It is calming to think of how carefully they were shaped, carved, and painted, carrying both beauty and meaning. Maya inscriptions appear on stone stele, temple walls, ceramics, and codices made of bark paper. They tell of rulers, rituals, battles, and calendars. Unlike alphabets, where a few dozen letters are repeated endlessly, Maya script had hundreds of signs. Learning them required years of training. Scribes, often from noble families, practiced patiently, guided by teachers. You might reflect on the rhythm of that education: steady repetition, slow mastery, gentle continuity. One of the most striking uses of Maya writing was in their calendar. The Maya tracked time with remarkable accuracy, noting solar cycles, lunar phases, and even the movements of Venus. Inscriptions combine dates with narratives, linking cosmic order with earthly events. You may quietly observe how naturally writing here bridged sky and society, turning the rhythm of the heavens into a visible, lasting record. Maya codices, folded like screens, contained pages filled with colorful glyphs and images. They recorded rituals, astronomical observations, and histories. Sadly, most were destroyed after the arrival of Europeans, leaving only a handful. Yet even in those few survivors, we glimpse the depth of Maya knowledge. Worth considering is how fragile written heritage can be, and how much depends on the care of later generations. The Aztecs, who flourished centuries later in central Mexico, used a different system. Their script was more pictorial, often combining images with glyphs to represent names, places, and events. It was not a full phonetic system like the Maya script, but it served well for record keeping and storytelling. Codices made by the Aztecs show vibrant illustrations of tribute lists, ceremonies, and histories. You may notice how naturally pictures and words flowed together, blending art with record.Aztec codices, painted on deerskin or plant fiber, carried both image and symbol. A town might be shown by a drawing of a hill, with a small glyph adding its name. A ruler could be depicted in image, with accompanying signs noting his deeds. This blending meant that even those not fully literate could understand much of the content. Writing here was inclusive, designed to be seen as much as read. You might find it calming to reflect that communication often succeeds best when it combines clarity with accessibility. Both Maya and Aztec scripts were deeply connected to ritual and authority. To inscribe an event was to give it permanence. A ruler's name carved on a stela or painted in a codex was not only a record, but a claim to legitimacy. Writing became part of power, as it had in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Yet it was also part of spirituality, linking humans to cycles of time and to the gods who governed those cycles. The artistry of Mesoamerican writing cannot be separated from its meaning. Glyphs were colorful, dynamic, and carefully arranged. Scribes painted with brushes, carved with stone tools, and planned their compositions with care. You may realize how writing here was not a plain code, but a living art form. Each page, each inscription, carried rhythm and balance. Designed to please the eye as well as the mind. It is also important to notice how writing connected communities. Tribute lists kept by the Aztecs recorded what each conquered region owed in goods: maize, cacao, cotton, feathers. These documents were practical, ensuring order across an empire. At the same time, they reveal cultural exchange, showing which products were valued and how they moved. Writing, once again, served both economy and identity. When Europeans arrived, they struggled to understand these scripts. Some attempted to destroy them, seeing them as dangerous. Others tried to preserve them, working with native scribes to create bilingual texts. Thanks to these efforts, some knowledge survived, though much was lost. You might find it meaningful to pause here and recognize the fragility of memory, how quickly centuries of patient work can be scattered, and how gently it must be cared for, even with losses. Scholars today have deciphered much of Maya writing. Through careful study, they read inscriptions that reveal dynasties, rituals, and astronomical records. Each deciphered sign brings a calm sense of connection, a bridge across time. For the Aztec system, though less phonetic, codices still convey rich stories through their combination of pictures and glyphs. In both, we see the human desire to give lasting form to life's rhythm. What stands out in Mesoamerican writing is its independence. These systems arose without influence from Egypt, Mesopotamia, or China. They show that the impulse to write, to record, to preserve, to anchor thought emerges wherever humans seek continuity. Worth thinking about is how this suggests a universal need, a calm echo across cultures, the need to let memory survive beyond voice. From the dense forests and wide valleys of the Americas, writing carried the stories of rulers, the cycles of time, the flow of goods, and the beauty of art. Though many records were lost, enough remained to remind us of the patience, skill, and creativity that shaped them. Each glyph, whether Maya or Aztec, is part of the larger human rhythm of giving thought a home outside the mind. So, when you think of Mesoamerican scripts, you can rest in the knowledge that writing has many forms, each tuned to the culture that shaped it. Alphabets, syllabaries, pictographs, and logograms, all are variations on a gentle theme, the desire to remember. And as these scripts flourished across oceans, in other parts of the world writing was entering a new rhythm, preserved in monasteries and copied by hand through long medieval centuries. As empires shifted and new religions spread, the role of writing entered another rhythm. In the long centuries of the Middle Ages, writing was preserved not by stone stelae or monumental inscriptions, but by the careful labor of scribes working in monasteries and scriptoria. It was a time when books were rare and precious, when every page was shaped by hand, and when the act of writing itself became a slow devotion. You may notice how natural this feels in the larger flow of history. After the spread of alphabets and scripts, there followed a long period where preservation mattered as much as invention. The word manuscript means written by hand, and in the Middle Ages, every book was exactly that. Pages were made of parchment, stretched and smoothed animal skins, prepared through time-consuming processes. Ink was mixed from natural materials, oak galls, soot, and plant extracts, carefully balanced for durability. Scribes worked in quiet rooms, their desks angled toward the light. Each line was drawn slowly, each letter shaped with precision. It is soothing to picture this patience, the calm scratch of a quill across parchment, steady as a breath. Scriptoria, the writing rooms of monasteries, were places of discipline and rhythm. Monks sat in rows, often in silence, copying texts line by line. Some copied sacred scriptures, others preserved classical works from Greece and Rome. ensuring that philosophy, science, and poetry did not vanish. You might quietly reflect on how fragile knowledge can be, and how much depends on those who dedicate their lives to careful repetition. Without these scribes, many voices of the past would have faded completely. The process of making a manuscript was long. First, parchment sheets were prepared. Then lines were ruled to guide the text. Only after that did the scribe begin to write, dipping the quill again and again into ink. Mistakes were corrected with a knife, scraping away the inked surface and smoothing it once more. Margins often contained notes, explanations, or even small illustrations. The pace was deliberate, unhurried. You may observe how naturally this slowness reflects the values of the time: steadiness, devotion, and care. Illuminated manuscripts added another layer of beauty. Gold leaf, bright pigments, and detailed designs surrounded the letters, turning each page into both book and artwork. Initial letters were decorated with vines, animals, or figures, glowing softly in candlelight. These illuminations were not merely decoration. They signaled importance, guiding the reader's eye. It is calming to think that the act of reading in the Middle Ages was often also an act of contemplation, with beauty and meaning flowing together on the page. Manuscripts were expensive and rare. To create a single book could take months or even years, and entire herds of animals might be needed to supply parchment. As a result, books were treasures, locked away, chained to lecterns, or passed carefully between hands. You might find it meaningful to reflect that knowledge itself was a scarce resource, valued with reverence. To hold a book was to hold something both fragile and powerful. Despite the rarity, manuscripts traveled. Monks carried them across Europe. Scholars exchanged them. Kings and queens collected them. Through these movements, learning spread. The works of Aristotle, Galen, and other ancient writers found new readers. Religious texts shaped devotion, while chronicles preserved history. You may notice how gently writing connects times and places. Even when roads are long and lives are short, the rhythm of medieval writing also shaped literacy. Most people could not read or write, but those who could held a special role. Monks, priests, and later clerks became bridges between spoken word and written record. The alphabet was the same, but its reach was limited. Still, within those limits, the written word carried immense influence, guiding law, religion, and memory. Schools and universities gradually expanded literacy. In cathedral schools and later at universities in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford, students copied texts by hand, learning not only content but also discipline. Writing was an exercise in patience as much as intellect. Worth thinking about is how the rhythm of education was once measured not in exams or lectures, but in the slow copying of lines, one after another, until the page was complete. Medieval manuscripts also preserve glimpses of daily life. Margins sometimes carry doodles, jokes, or notes by scribes, small reminders of the humanity behind the labor. A scribe might complain of cold hands, of tired eyes, of dim light. You might quietly smile at this, noticing how even in solemn work, human voices found ways to appear. These small asides bring warmth, softening the image of monastic silence with moments of humor and individuality. Variety of scripts used in manuscripts reflects cultural change. Uncial, Carolingian minuscule, Gothic. Each style carried its own rhythm, its own balance of curves and angles. Carolingian minuscule, developed under Charlemagne, was especially clear and elegant, designed to unify writing across the empire. Later, Gothic script, dense and angular, reflected the architecture of cathedrals and the intricacy of medieval art. May observe how writing styles mirror the spirit of their times. shaping and shaped by broader patterns of life. In the Islamic world, too, manuscripts flourished. Calligraphers copied the Quran with devotion, creating works of both beauty and precision. Arabic script, flowing and curved, became an art form in itself, valued for its harmony and grace. Scientific and philosophical texts, translated into Arabic, were preserved and expanded, later flowing back into Europe. It is soothing to realize that across cultures, the same rhythm of hand and ink carried knowledge forward. The Middle Ages were, in many ways, centuries of preservation. Writing was not spreading rapidly to all, nor was it yet mass-produced. But what was written endured, bridging ancient and modern times. Without the slow work of scribes, the chain of knowledge would have broken. You may notice how gently this teaches us about patience. Sometimes, slow copying is the very thing that allows continuity. The manuscript tradition also shaped how people read. Reading aloud was common, even when alone, as letters were seen as sounds to be voiced. Silent reading grew slowly, becoming more common only later. This rhythm of voice and eye reminds us that reading is itself a practice that evolves. Worth considering is how habits we take for granted today, such as scanning silently across a page, were once rare and new. By the end of the Middle Ages, thousands of manuscripts existed across Europe and beyond. They formed libraries in monasteries, universities, and courts. Yet compared to later times, their number was still small. Each book represented immense labor, devotion, and resources. To encounter one was to meet the product of months of human care. As we reflect on medieval writing, we can see its gentle role in history. It was not a time of invention, but of safeguarding. Letters were not multiplied quickly, but they were shaped with love. The rhythm of quills on parchment, the glow of gold leaf, the patience of scribes, all these gave writing continuity through centuries of change. So, when you think of the Middle Ages, you can allow yourself to rest in the thought of slow, steady work. The manuscript, copied line by line, preserved voices from Greece, Rome, and early Christianity. It carried them forward, waiting for the moment when a new invention, the printing press, would release words more widely. And from the calm silence of monasteries, writing was preparing to enter a new rhythm of speed, spread, and transformation. From the still silence of scriptoria, where monks shaped letters slowly on parchment, the story of writing moves toward a moment of transformation. In the 15th century, a new method emerged in Europe, printing with movable type. This invention did not abandon the calm patience of scribes, but it added a new rhythm, faster, wider, more accessible. You may notice how naturally history alternates between slowness and acceleration, as if knowledge sometimes rests in silence, and then suddenly flows outward with new energy. Before Gutenberg's press, there were other experiments. In China and Korea, block printing and movable type had already been developed centuries earlier. Entire pages were carved into wood, inked, and pressed onto paper. In Korea, metal movable type was used in the 13th century. These innovations show that the idea of multiplying texts was not confined to Europe. Still, in the West, the timing of Gutenberg's invention around 1450 met the moment when demand for books was rising. Paper was becoming more common, and universities were expanding. The conditions were ready for change. Johannes Gutenberg of Mainz is often credited with combining existing elements into a working system: movable metal type, oil-based ink, and a press adapted from those used for wine and cloth. With this, letters could be arranged, inked, and pressed repeatedly onto sheets of paper. The same set of type could be reused for many pages, then rearranged for others. It is calming to reflect on the quiet ingenuity of this. No longer did each page need to be written by hand. Instead, words could be multiplied with rhythm and consistency. The first major book printed with this method was the Gutenberg Bible. Its pages still carry a sense of balance and care, designed to resemble the manuscripts that preceded it. But unlike manuscripts, many identical copies could be produced. You might find it meaningful to notice this gentle paradox. Printing created speed, yet its earliest works still honored the beauty of tradition. Change arrived not with harsh rupture, but with continuity. The effect of printing on knowledge was profound. Books became less expensive, more plentiful, and more consistent. Scholars could share texts without relying on slow copying. Ideas traveled more easily across cities and countries. You may observe how naturally this widened learning. Once a book could be printed hundreds of times, its reach multiplied beyond the walls of monasteries. Universities grew, literacy spread, and debate quickened. The rhythm of writing also changed. In the age of manuscripts, each copy was unique, with small variations introduced by scribes. Printing brought uniformity. Every page in an edition looked the same, every line repeated without change. This gave stability to texts, reducing errors and preserving accuracy. It is soothing to think how such steadiness supported science, law, and philosophy, where precision mattered deeply. Printing also shifted power. No longer was writing held mainly by religious institutions. Lay people, merchants, and scholars gained access. Vernacular languages found space beside Latin, giving voice to communities that had been silent in text. Worth thinking about is how writing, once a guarded treasure, began to flow more freely, like water leaving a reservoir and nourishing wider fields. The cultural effects were immense. The Renaissance, with its return to classical learning, was nourished by printing. Humanist texts, ancient authors, and new reflections spread quickly. Later, the Reformation, with its emphasis on personal access to Scripture, relied on the printed word. Printing gave individuals the ability to read, compare, and decide. You may notice how gently this reveals the double nature of writing. It can preserve tradition, but it can also open doors to change. The physical process of printing carried its own rhythm. Compositors arranged tiny pieces of metal type by hand, line by line, page by page. The pressman inked the type, placed the paper, pulled the lever. Sheets were set aside to dry, then bound into books. Each step required care, but compared to handwriting, the pace was many times faster. You might reflect on the calm coordination of this work. Many hands contributing, each gesture steady, each page emerging like a heartbeat. Printing also brought with it new forms of art. Title pages, illustrations, and woodcuts accompanied text. Margins left space for readers' notes, encouraging interaction. Books became not only sources of knowledge, but also personal companions, carried in satchels, stored on shelves, read by candlelight. It is calming to think how the intimacy of reading deepened as books became more available. The transition from manuscript to print did not happen overnight. For decades, scribes and printers worked side by side. Some manuscripts imitated printed styles, while some printed books were illuminated by hand to resemble manuscripts. This overlap shows the gentleness of change. Traditions do not vanish abruptly, but fade slowly into new rhythms. Over time, printing presses spread across Europe. Venice became a major center, producing texts in many languages. By the 16th century, millions of books had been printed. Knowledge that once moved like a slow river now flowed like a wide, calm sea, touching distant shores. You may quietly observe how naturally technology, when joined with human need, expands beyond its origin. The impact on literacy was steady but significant. More books meant more opportunities to learn. Schools had texts, scholars had references, readers had stories. The alphabet, already a foundation, now reached further into homes and minds. Printing made it easier to sustain libraries, to preserve ideas, and to challenge assumptions. Worth noticing is how each invention of writing, from clay tablets to papyrus, from parchment to press, built on what came before, carrying continuity into change. In the centuries that followed, printing shaped revolutions in thought. Science advanced as observations could be recorded and shared widely. Laws stabilized as texts became fixed and accessible. Philosophies spread, sparking discussion across borders. Religious movements grew, dividing and reuniting communities. Through it all, the printed word became a steady presence, like a quiet current beneath the surface of history. When we pause to reflect on the invention of printing, we can see it not only as a technical achievement, but also as a human shift in rhythm. Writing moved from the slow breath of the scribe to the steadier, faster beat of the press. It did not lose its calmness. It simply reached more ears and eyes. You might allow yourself to rest in the thought that every printed page today, whether from a press or a digital screen, carries within it the memory of that first Bible, ink pressed onto paper in quiet minds. So, as we close this chapter of writing's history, we can see how the press prepared the way for even wider transformations. From printing houses and libraries, writing would soon travel on new surfaces. Like paper carried along trade routes and into new forms as newspapers and pamphlets began to shape daily life. In this way, the rhythm of writing kept unfolding, steady, adaptive, and always carrying the calm desire to preserve memory. The story of writing is not only about letters and symbols. It is also about the surfaces that hold them. Clay tablets, stone carvings, papyrus scrolls, and parchment pages all served their time. Yet one material came to dominate, carrying writing further and more gently than any before: paper. You may notice how naturally this invention seems to fit our sense of the written word: light in the hand, soft to the touch, steady enough to last, yet flexible enough to move. Paper was first created in China during the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century CE. Tradition credits Tsi Lun, a Cork official, with refining the process. He used plant fibers, mulberry bark, hemp, and rags, which were soaked, beaten into pulp, and spread thinly on a screen. When dried, the mat of fibers formed a smooth surface, ready to receive ink. It is calming to reflect on the simplicity of this process. Water, fiber, and patience, combining to create something both humble and transformative. Earlier, bamboo slips and silk had been used as writing materials in China. Bamboo was heavy and cumbersome, silk expensive and delicate. Paper, by contrast, was lighter, cheaper, and more practical. It could be produced in quantity, folded, bound, and carried with ease. You might quietly observe how naturally societies adopt what is both useful and gentle. Paper spread not because it was luxurious, but because it fit the rhythm of daily life. At first, paper was used mainly for official records and correspondence. Soon, however, it became central to culture. Buddhist texts were copied on paper, allowing teachings to spread more widely. Poetry and philosophy flourished, preserved in collections that could be shared among scholars. It is soothing to think of paper as a bridge, thin and fragile, yet carrying entire traditions of thought. From China, the art of papermaking moved outward. Along the Silk Road, techniques spread to Central Asia and beyond. By the 8th century, papermaking reached Samarkand, a city of trade and learning. Arab scholars adopted the craft, refining it with linen rags, which produced durable sheets. Paper mills appeared in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. You may notice how naturally trade carries not only goods, but also ideas, spreading knowledge with the same calm rhythm as spices and silk dot in the Islamic world. Paper became essential. It supported the flourishing of science, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Libraries in Baghdad and Cordoba grew vast, filled with manuscripts on paper. Copyists worked steadily, their quills moving across smooth surfaces. The lightness of paper made books easier to produce and to carry. Worth considering is how this single material quietly expanded the rhythm of learning, making possible the preservation and sharing of countless works. By the 11th century, papermaking reached Europe, introduced through Spain and Sicily. At first, parchment remained dominant, valued for its durability. But as universities expanded and demand for texts grew, paper offered a practical alternative. Mills were established in Italy, France, and Germany. The sheets were made from rags, beaten into pulp, pressed and dried. You might allow yourself to picture the steady labor of water wheels and workers, each sheet emerging with calm regularity. The arrival of paper prepared the way for printing. Without cheap, plentiful surfaces, the press could not have transformed knowledge so quickly. It is soothing to realize how inventions depend on one another, each step setting the stage for the next. Clay allowed cuneiform, papyrus supported hieroglyphs, parchment carried medieval manuscripts, and paper gave printing its wings. Paper also shaped how people interacted with writing. It was easy to fold, bind, and store. Letters could be sent, accounts kept, books multiplied. The everydayness of paper made writing part of ordinary life, not only the domain of rulers or scribes. You may notice how gently this widened literacy, inviting more people into the rhythm of written memory. The textures of paper varied. Some sheets were rough, others smooth. Some bore watermarks, faint designs pressed into the pulp, identifying the mill. These subtle details remind us that even something so common was shaped with care. Worth thinking about is how each sheet of paper, no matter how plain, carried within it the quiet labor of hands. Fibers and water. In Asia, papermaking developed further with innovations such as woodblock printing. Buddhist sutras, Confucian classics, and popular tales were reproduced with ink on paper, creating early mass production. This shows how naturally material and method intertwine. Once paper was available, printing techniques expanded, and once printing spread, paper was needed even more. The fragility of paper is balanced by its abundance. Unlike stone or clay, paper can burn, tear, or decay. Yet because it is so easily produced, it survives in numbers. Archives, libraries, and personal collections all hold paper documents centuries old. It is calming to think of this paradox. Each sheet is delicate, but together they form a resilient memory. As paper spread globally, it became a universal companion. Poems, contracts, drawings, scientific notes, letters of love and sorrow, all found a home on paper. The material carried both the ordinary and the extraordinary, the sacred and the mundane. You might find it meaningful to reflect that this very balance is what makes paper central to human history. It accepts whatever is given, without judgment, quietly preserving. By the early modern period, paper was everywhere. In Europe, it supported printing presses, newspapers, and pamphlets. In Asia, it nourished calligraphy and literature. In the Islamic world, it carried the works of scholars and poets. Across all these cultures, paper unified the rhythm of writing, allowing ideas to travel with a new lightness. Even today, in a digital age, paper has not vanished. Books, notebooks, letters, and documents still rest in our hands. The gentle feel of paper, the sound of a turning page continue to comfort. You may notice how naturally humans return to this material, even when newer ones appear. Paper endures because it is simple, accessible, and calm. So, as we reflect on the journey of paper, we can see it as both fragile and strong, humble and transformative. Born in China, carried along trade routes, refined in the Islamic world, and embraced in Europe, it became the quiet foundation of knowledge. Without paper, the spread of printing, science, and literature would have been far slower. Its thin sheets have carried the weight of civilizations. From the calm strength of paper, the story of writing moves onward. With printing presses and paper multiplying together, writing began to shape not only sacred texts and scholarly works, but also daily life, as newspapers and pamphlets emerged to inform and connect societies. From the fragile strength of paper, the story of writing moves naturally toward one of its most enduring roles, the service of administration and the shaping of state power. Across cultures and centuries, rulers, officials, and governments relied on writing to organize, to control, and to sustain order. You may notice how steady this function has remained. From clay tablets listing sheep in Mesopotamia to modern documents stored in digital archives, writing has always offered a calm backbone for governance. The earliest states could not have functioned without records. In Mesopotamia, lists of harvests and accounts of trade allowed temples and palaces to distribute resources fairly. In Egypt, hieroglyphic inscriptions on monuments and papyrus rolls recorded taxes, labor duties, and decrees. It is soothing to see the continuity. Writing began not as ornament, but as necessity, ensuring that memory would not fade when stability was needed. As societies grew larger, writing became even more central. In China, dynasties kept meticulous records on bamboo slips, silk, and later paper. Census counts, land surveys, and tax registers allowed emperors to know the size of their populations and the wealth of their lands. You might reflect on the calm practicality of this. Writing turned the vast and complex into something visible and manageable. Without these records, governance would have been fragile, easily disrupted by memory's limits. In India, inscriptions of Emperor Ashoka on stone pillars carried moral guidance across his empire. Though deeply spiritual in tone, they were also acts of administration, reminding people of laws and expectations. Worth thinking about is how naturally writing blends authority with continuity. Words carved into stone or copied into manuscripts do not vanish with a single voice, but remain for generations. The Roman Empire, with its vast roads and provinces, depended on writing at every level. Laws were codified, decrees posted, contracts drawn, and military orders dispatched. Latin inscriptions on stone proclaimed victories, while wax tablets recorded the movements of goods. It is calming to recognize how writing served both grandeur and routine, shaping the rhythm of empire from the forum to the frontier. Medieval Europe continued this tradition. Royal charters granted lands, monasteries kept account books, and towns recorded transactions. Even when literacy was limited, those who could write held positions of influence, bridging rulers and ruled. You may notice how gently writing reinforces structures. Those who master it often guide how power is remembered and applied. The Islamic world offers another perspective. From Baghdad to Cordoba, administrations relied on paper records for taxation, trade, and law. The very word bureaucracy carries echoes of bureau, the desk upon which documents were written. Scribes and clerks formed an entire class, sustaining the flow of governance. You might quietly observe that writing does not only serve rulers. It also creates communities of record keepers, whose steady labor makes power possible. Censuses, surveys, and registers became the pulse of states. In early modern Europe, rulers demanded detailed accounts of their lands, who lived where, what they owned, how much they produced. Writing made people visible to authority. This visibility carried both safety and burden. It allowed fairer taxation, but it also enabled greater control. It is worth considering how writing, though neutral in itself, can take on different tones depending on how it is used. Colonial administrations, too, depended heavily on writing. Ships crossing oceans carried not only goods, but also records, maps, treaties, inventories, and legal documents. In colonies, officials wrote censuses, contracts, and reports, extending state power into distant lands. You may notice how calmly paper carried authority across seas, giving distant rulers presence in places they had never walked. Modern states are unimaginable without writing. Constitutions, laws, and regulations provide structure. Passports, identity documents, and licenses make citizens visible. Bureaucracies generate endless forms, reports, and files. You might allow yourself to reflect that every act of governance rests quietly on marks of ink or letters of print. Without them, order would dissolve into uncertainty. Writing also serves as a shield. Citizens can appeal to written law, pointing to statutes that protect them. Courts depend on documents as evidence. Parliaments and assemblies publish proceedings. It is calming to realize that writing, though used by power, also empowers those who seek fairness. The same letters that enforce taxes can also guarantee rights. One of the most profound aspects of administrative writing is its endurance. A law written centuries ago can still shape life today. Deeds, wills, and contracts often outlast those who sign them. This persistence brings safety, but also inertia. Once recorded, words can guide societies long after contexts have changed. Worth noticing is how this endurance makes writing both anchor and weight. Archives became the memory of states. In dusty rooms, clerks stored rolls, books, and files. Each shelf was a quiet treasury of power, where decisions of the past rested, waiting to be recalled. Even now, modern archives, digital or physical, serve as the calm core of governance, preserving the continuity of institutions. You may find it meaningful to think of these archives as collective memory, steadier than human recollection. The language of administration often grows specialized, with terms, abbreviations, and formats. This creates precision, but can also create distance. Writing in governance balances clarity with formality, always seeking authority. You might gently observe that this tone contrasts with the flowing beauty of poetry or the devotion of scripture, yet it remains just as central. It is the rhythm of law and order, expressed in letters. From ancient clay tablets to modern databases, writing has shaped states. It has counted people, recorded wealth, announced laws, and preserved treaties. At times, it has been used for care, ensuring fairness, granting protection. At other times, it has been used for control, fixing hierarchies, collecting tribute, enforcing power. Writing itself remains calm, offering permanence. It is human choices that determine how it is applied. So, as we think of writing as an instrument of administration, we can rest in the awareness of its dual nature. It is both gentle and firm, both liberating and binding. You may notice how naturally this reflects human life itself, where order is necessary, but freedom is always sought. And from this long service to governments and states, writing also moved into another realm, the realm of faith, where letters carried prayers, scriptures, and spiritual reflections, giving continuity not only to law and power, but also to belief and devotion. From the calm halls of administration, where records sustained kingdoms and laws, the journey of writing moves toward another dimension of human life, faith and spirituality. Across cultures, letters have not only counted goods or announced decrees. They have also carried prayers, hymns, scriptures, and reflections on the divine. You may notice how naturally this role flows from the essence of writing itself. The desire to preserve what matters most, whether material or spiritual. In ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs covered tomb walls, guiding souls into the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, written on papyrus and placed beside the departed, offered spells and instructions to ensure safe passage. It is calming to think of writing here as a gentle companion, a silent guide meant to protect even beyond death. Each sign carried not only meaning, but also power, believed to shape reality itself. In Mesopotamia, too, writing was linked to the sacred. Hymns to gods, prayers for protection, and myths of creation were pressed into clay tablets. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though filled with human struggles, also carried reflections on mortality and the search for eternal life. Worth considering is how naturally the spiritual and the written joined together. If writing could preserve memory across generations, it seemed equally suited to carrying the words of the gods. In India, Sanskrit texts preserved on palm leaves carried the hymns of the Vedas, the philosophies of the Upanishads, and the epic journeys of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. For centuries, these verses had been transmitted orally with rhythm and chant. Writing gave them another form, adding quiet stability to what was already strong in memory. You might reflect on how gently writing here complemented voice, ensuring that the vibration of sacred sound also had a visible home. In Buddhist traditions, sutras were copied with care, sometimes hundreds of times, as acts of devotion. Monks in China, Japan, and Tibet filled scrolls with flowing characters, believing that the act of copying itself brought merit. The Diamond Sutra, printed in China in the 9th century, is the world's earliest dated printed book. It shows how naturally paper and printing, once available, were used to spread spiritual teachings. You may notice how calmly writing here became both practice and gift. Copying a sutra was not just preserving words, but also shaping the mind toward patience and focus. The Hebrew Bible, preserved in scrolls and manuscripts, represents another deep connection between writing and faith. Each letter was copied with precision, each word counted, each scroll reviewed. To write was to participate in continuity, linking generations of readers and worshippers. It is soothing to reflect that this attention was not only practical but reverent. The very act of writing became part of devotion. Christianity, too, is inseparable from writing. The Gospels, the letters of Paul, and later theological works were copied in monasteries, spread across Europe, and eventually printed in great numbers. The Bible became not only a sacred text, but also one of the first major works to be multiplied by the press. You might quietly observe how writing here shaped entire cultures. Sermons, laws, and rituals all rested on the written word. In the Islamic world, writing took on a unique beauty. The Quran, revealed in Arabic, was preserved with absolute care. Calligraphy became the highest art because the written word of God was itself sacred. Pages filled with flowing letters, adorned with geometric and floral designs, carried not only meaning, but also visual rhythm. You may find it calming to see how letters themselves became prayer, their shapes echoing devotion. Beyond scriptures, writing also preserved the reflections of mystics and poets. Rumi, Kabir, Hildegard of Bingen, and countless others poured spiritual longing into words. These writings, copied and carried, offered guidance, comfort, and inspiration. Worth noticing is how naturally writing expands the voice of the individual into the memory of the community. What begins as a personal prayer can become a shared path when given shape on a page. Across traditions, writing often held a protective role. Amulets carried verses, charms bore inscriptions, and names were written to safeguard lives. The written word was seen not only as record, but as force. You might allow yourself to reflect that even today, many people keep small texts or prayers close, trusting in the quiet presence of letters. The role of writing in religion also shaped literacy. In many places, the first to read and write were priests, monks, or scholars of Scripture. Temples, mosques, and churches became centers of learning. To know letters was to gain access not only to records, but to sacred truth. It is gentle to realize how much of early education in many cultures was rooted in the desire to read sacred texts. Writing also created continuity in rituals. Prayers repeated daily could be traced back to manuscripts copied centuries earlier. Festivals and ceremonies were guided by texts that preserved precise instructions. This steadiness gave people a sense of safety. What was written would not vanish with the death of memory, but would remain as a quiet guide for future generations. Even as faiths grew and spread, writing provided a bridge between cultures. Translations of scriptures into Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Chinese, and many other languages allowed ideas to move softly across borders. Sometimes this brought unity, sometimes division, but always continuity. You may notice how naturally writing becomes a mediator, carrying one culture's sacred voice into another's hearing dot. In all these traditions, writing was not neutral. It was revered, guarded, copied with care. A scribe of the Torah, a monk illuminating a gospel, a calligrapher shaping the Quran, all understood that to write was to serve. The calm rhythm of pen or brush was part of devotion itself. It is soothing to imagine this, to let the thought rest. Writing is prayer, each letter shaped as an act of faith. So, when we think of writing as a carrier of religion and spirituality, we can see it as more than communication. It is continuity, reverence, and offering. From Egypt to India, from Jerusalem to Mecca, from monasteries to temples, letters have been trusted not only to preserve, but also to sanctify. They have linked the visible and the invisible, the human and the divine dot, and as faith shaped writing, writing also shaped knowledge. From sacred texts emerged schools of philosophy, systems of law, and traditions of learning. The same letters that carried prayers also carried observations of nature, questions of meaning, and reflections on life. From here, the calm rhythm of writing leads us into another realm, the world of science, where marks on paper began to measure stars, plants, and the movements of the human heart. From the sacred halls where scriptures were copied and prayers inscribed, writing extended its reach into another human pursuit, the search to understand nature. Science, in all its early forms, could not have advanced without the calm presence of writing. To observe was one step, but to record was another, and only with record could memory grow into knowledge. You may notice how naturally this progression unfolds. Experience becomes pattern, pattern becomes text, and text becomes shared discovery. In Mesopotamia, some of the earliest scientific records appear on clay tablets. Lists of stars, phases of the moon, eclipses, and planetary movements were carefully pressed into wedge-shaped signs. Farmers relied on these observations to plan crops, priests to predict rituals, rulers to time decisions. It is soothing to think of those tablets as steady mirrors of the sky, bringing the rhythm of the heavens down into marks that could be read by human eyes. In Egypt, too, writing served science. Medical papyri recorded treatments, diagnoses, and surgical procedures. Mathematical texts described calculations for building pyramids, measuring fields, and distributing grain. You might reflect on how gently practical needs encouraged precision. Without written formulas, knowledge of measurement would vanish with each generation. Writing gave it continuity, a quiet permanence that tools and voices alone could not provide. India offers another strand of this unfolding. Sanskrit texts like the Sulba Sutras described geometric rules for constructing altars, while later works introduced concepts of zero and advanced calculations. These were not abstract alone. They were linked to ritual and daily life. Writing carried them forward, turning oral rules into visible steps. You may observe how naturally spirituality and science mingled here, and how writing served both with equal steadiness. In China, records of medicine, astronomy, and engineering flourished on paper. The invention of paper itself gave science a new rhythm, easier to copy, easier to spread. Observations of comets, earthquakes, and eclipses were written in court chronicles, while medical texts described herbs, acupuncture, and anatomy. Worth thinking about is how writing in China was both practical and holistic, preserving details not only of physical bodies, but also of balance and harmony. Greek science, carried in letters of the alphabet, laid another foundation. The writings of Hippocrates on medicine, Euclid on geometry, and Aristotle on natural philosophy survived because they were copied and recopied. Without written text, their thought would have been scattered. With it, their ideas traveled, reaching Rome, the Islamic world, and later Europe. You might allow yourself to rest in the thought that every diagram of a triangle or description of a plant today carries within it a calm echo of those early manuscripts. Islamic Golden Age shows how writing served as bridge and expansion. Scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom translated Greek texts into Arabic, adding their own commentaries. Al-Khwarizmi's works on algebra, Alhazen's studies of optics, Avicenna's canon of medicine, all were written, copied, and spread. It is calming to imagine the quiet rhythm of scribes in this time, their hands steady as they preserved knowledge that would later return to Europe and shape the Renaissance. The rhythm of science depends on accuracy. An observation forgotten is lost, but one written becomes shareable. A calculation spoken may vanish, but one recorded can be checked, corrected, and built upon. You may quietly notice how naturally writing supports humility. It fixes what is known but leaves room for revision. Each record becomes a foundation, but also an invitation to continue. The role of mathematics and science shows this clearly. Numbers, equations, and diagrams require precision that only writing can preserve. The Pythagorean theorem, the decimal system, the use of zero, all gained strength because they were recorded. Without writing, they would remain fragile insights. With writing, they became tools carried across centuries. Worth considering is how much of daily life, architecture, engineering, trade, rests calmly on marks that symbolize numbers. In the Renaissance, the union of printing and science accelerated this rhythm. Copernicus's On the Revolutions, Galileo's Dialogue, Newton's Principia, all depended on the printed page. Observations of planets, experiments with motion, formulations of gravity were not only made but preserved. Printing ensured that one scientist's careful words could reach others, building dialogue across borders. You may notice how gently science becomes a conversation once writing gives it a shared surface, laboratories and later centuries filled with notebooks. Every experiment was written down, conditions, steps, results. Failures and successes alike were recorded. The calm act of writing made repetition possible, allowed others to verify, and turned individual trials into collective progress. You might find it meaningful to reflect that even great discoveries often began as quiet notes in the margins of a notebook. Science also demanded new forms of writing. Tables of data, diagrams of anatomy, charts of the heavens, all emerged as ways to shape information. Each diagram was a blend of art and precision, carrying clarity and form. It is soothing to realize that even the most technical drawing has roots in the calm desire to make knowledge visible and steady. The mathematical notations we use today, plus, minus, equals, integral signs, were themselves inventions of writing. They arose gradually, standardized so that ideas could travel. Once a symbol was agreed upon, it reduced confusion and increased speed. You may reflect on how naturally writing refines itself, seeking not only to preserve thought, but to make it lighter to carry. Even in modern times, scientific writing remains central. Articles, reports, and journals are the backbone of discovery. Without them, progress would remain scattered, hidden in laboratories or mines. With them, each finding enters a steady stream where others can read, respond, and build. You may notice how this rhythm echoes the earliest clay tablets of Mesopotamia. Observation, record, continuity. Writing in science also reveals its humility. Unlike scripture or decree, scientific text is always provisional. It says, "This is what we see now," leaving space for change. Worth noticing is how this humility is itself calming. Writing here is not an end, but a step, a bridge between present knowledge and future insight. As we look at the role of writing in science, we can see it as a gentle companion to curiosity. Every hypothesis, every observation, every formula becomes firmer when given form. Without writing, science would remain fleeting, each discovery lost like breath in air. With writing, discoveries rest quietly on paper, waiting to be revisited. So, when we think of writing in science, we can allow ourselves to rest in its rhythm, steady, patient, enduring. From counting stars on clay tablets to equations on blackboards, from herbal remedies on bamboo slips to printed journals, the pattern is the same. Writing holds observation, shapes it into clarity, and offers it to others. And from here, the calm thread of writing leads us toward another transformation. The modern age, when typewriters, printing presses, and eventually digital machines would carry words faster than ever before, turning human thought into streams of text flowing across the globe. From the notebooks of scientists and the pages of illuminated manuscripts, the story of writing enters the modern era. Here, letters began to move faster, more mechanically, and more widely than ever before. Printing had already multiplied books, but now machines and digital devices gave writing a new rhythm, quicker, lighter, yet still carrying the same calm purpose, to preserve thought. You may notice how naturally each stage of writing builds on the last, expanding possibilities without erasing what came before. In the 19th century, the typewriter emerged. At first, it seemed a curiosity, a machine that pressed letters directly onto paper with inked metal arms. Soon it became a tool of business, administration, and creativity. Typing was faster than handwriting, more consistent, easier to copy. Offices filled with the soft clatter of keys, each stroke leaving a steady impression. It is soothing to imagine the rhythm of those sounds, a mechanical heartbeat of words spreading across desks and tables. The typewriter also democratized writing. Clerks, journalists, and novelists used it to produce clean pages quickly. Women entered workplaces as typists, shaping both offices and society. You might reflect on how gently technology can open new paths, not only by speeding tasks, but by changing who participates in them. Each letter struck on a typewriter was more than a mark. It was a step in the widening of literacy and labor. Alongside typewriters, printing technology advanced. Steam-powered presses in the 19th century produced newspapers, pamphlets, and books at a scale unseen before. Knowledge reached towns and villages, carried by cheap print. Newspapers created a daily rhythm of information, linking communities through shared words. You may quietly observe how naturally writing, once the privilege of a few, became the companion of many. Present in homes, workplaces, and streets, the telegraph, though not writing in the traditional sense, also transformed communication. Dots and dashes carried words across wires, reducing distance. Soon after, the typewriter combined with the telegraph to create teletype machines, printing messages at great speed. Worth thinking about is how writing adapts to channels. Whether ink on paper or signals on wire, the purpose remains the same: to give thought a form that travels. The 20th century brought further shifts. Typewriters evolved into electric versions, faster and quieter. Carbon paper allowed multiple copies at once. Offices became places of documents, letters, and reports, all shaped by machines. At the same time, personal diaries, poems, and stories continued to flow in handwriting, showing that new tools never erase older ones, but exist alongside them. You may notice how naturally writing balances tradition and innovation, always carrying both. Then came computers. In the mid-20th century, keyboards replaced typewriter arms, producing digital letters on screens. Words could be typed, corrected, and rearranged without wasting paper. Documents could be saved, copied, and transmitted. This shift was gentle yet immense. Writing became less fixed and more fluid. You might find it calming to reflect that even as technology changed, the letters themselves did not. The shapes on your screen still descend from alphabets thousands of years old. Digital text introduced new rhythms of speed. Email replaced letters for much communication, messages arriving in moments rather than days. Text files multiplied, stored on disks and servers. The Internet connected millions of people, allowing writing to flow without borders. Blogs, forums, and social media turned individuals into publishers, sharing thoughts instantly with a wide audience. Worth noticing is how this echoes the spread of alphabets long ago. Only now the reach is faster, broader, and quieter in cost. The digital shift also changed preservation. Archives once filled with parchment and paper now contain servers and clouds. Yet the principle is the same. Writing must be stored, organized, and retrieved. You may observe how naturally human memory relies on external surfaces, whether clay, papyrus, paper, or digital code. Each medium differs, but the calm purpose endures. In modern times, fonts and layouts added another layer. Letters could be styled, enlarged, or illuminated digitally, echoing the artistry of illuminated manuscripts. Graphic design gave writing visual rhythm, shaping how we see and feel texts. You might reflect on how gently beauty remains part of writing, even when machines make reproduction effortless. At the same time, the abundance of digital text has created new challenges. Words are multiplied so quickly that they can overwhelm. The calm patience once needed to copy a manuscript contrasts with the flood of instant messages. It is worth thinking about how balance must be found. Writing is both abundance and silence, both chatter and deep record. You may notice how naturally people seek calm spaces within the noise, turning back to books, journals, or quiet pages, even amid digital streams. Despite these changes, the continuity of writing remains striking. Whether on clay or screen, a letter is still a vessel of sound and meaning. Whether typed on a machine or drawn by hand, it carries thought across time and space. This steadiness is soothing. Technologies shift, But the gentle purpose of writing endures. The digital age also revived ancient questions. Who controls writing? Who has access? Just as kings once carved decrees in stone, modern platforms store words in servers. Just as scribes once preserved sacred texts, programmers now design codes to keep information safe. You may find it meaningful to reflect that each age reshapes writing's guardians, but the rhythm of preservation continues. In classrooms and homes, typing has become as natural as handwriting once was. Children learn keyboards alongside pens, moving between paper and screen with ease. Offices rely on documents stored digitally, while personal messages flow in texts and emails. Writing has become both lighter and more pervasive, woven into every moment of daily life. You might quietly observe how naturally this reflects writing's destiny, to be both extraordinary and ordinary, both sacred and routine. Even as digital tools advance, handwriting has not disappeared. Journals, signatures, and notes remain. The feel of pen on paper, the slowness of a drawn line, still brings calm. This coexistence reminds us that writing is not tied to a single tool. Worth considering is how writing's power lies not in the medium, but in the rhythm of thought it preserves. So, as we reflect on modern times, we can see how typewriters, printing, and digital technology have expanded writing's reach. From clattering keys to glowing screens, the same letters carry law, science, poetry, and memory. The shift is vast, yet the essence remains calm continuity. And as writing enters the digital age, another question arises. How does it shape the way societies connect, govern, and remember? From private notes to public declarations, writing continues to serve as the bridge between personal thought and collective life. As our calm journey through the history of writing draws to a close, it is gentle to pause and reflect on what has unfolded. From the earliest scratches on stone to the glowing screens of today, writing has carried human thought across thousands of years. You may notice how naturally this long story reveals itself not as a sharp sequence of inventions, but as a steady unfolding, like breath after breath, mark after mark. Building continuity without hurry. At the beginning, symbols emerged as tentative steps. A carved line in bone, a painted sign on a cave wall, a clay mark recording grain. Each was simple, yet each held intention. These were not only records, but beginnings of trust. Trust that thought could live outside the body, resting on surface and shape. It is soothing to think of how fragile these first marks were, yet how enduring they proved, allowing us to glimpse minds from tens of thousands of years ago. From these symbols grew full systems. In Mesopotamia, wedge-shaped cuneiform pressed into clay gave states their stability. In Egypt, hieroglyphs filled temples with sacred presence. In China, characters linked past and present in continuous tradition. You might reflect on how gently each culture shaped writing to its own rhythm, showing that letters are not universal by design, but universal by need. As time passed, alphabets simplified writing, making it lighter and more accessible. The Phoenician system, adapted by Greeks and Romans, spread widely. In India, Brahmi gave rise to scripts across South and Southeast Asia. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec developed intricate glyphs, independent yet parallel to other traditions. You may quietly observe how naturally invention blooms in many places, as if writing were a seed that germinates wherever memory seeks safety. The Middle Ages slowed the rhythm, turning writing into devotion. Monks copied manuscripts, letter by letter, preserving both scripture and science. Each page was shaped with patience, every illumination glowing softly in the margins. This was not rapid, but it was enduring. Worth considering is how sometimes slowness itself ensures survival. letting knowledge pass gently through centuries of change. Then, with the printing press and the spread of paper, writing multiplied. Books became abundant. Newspapers spread information. Pamphlets carried ideas. Revolutions in thought, religion, and science followed. You might notice how naturally abundance changes pace. Once writing was rare and precious. Now it became ordinary, woven into daily life. And yet, even in this expansion, the calm essence remained. Letters preserving memory, shaping community, carrying meaning. Writing also served power. It counted citizens, announced laws, and preserved treaties. It could control as well as liberate. But alongside this, writing carried prayers, scriptures, and reflections of the soul. You may reflect on how gently these two paths coexisted, letters binding societies outwardly, while also guiding individuals inwardly. In science, writing turned observation into continuity. Numbers and diagrams carried discoveries. Experiments were recorded, hypotheses tested. Writing gave knowledge the ability to accumulate, each generation building quietly on the last. It is soothing to realize that progress in science depends not on sudden brilliance alone, but on steady record, the calm patience of notes written and preserved. Modern times brought typewriters, printing presses, and eventually computers. The rhythm of writing became faster, lighter, and more widespread. Messages crossed continents in seconds. Words multiplied on screens. Yet even with such speed, the essence of writing did not change. You may notice how naturally the same letters that once filled stone tablets now flow across digital code, their forms unchanged, though their surfaces have shifted. When we step back, we see a long continuity. Writing has always been more than communication. It is memory, authority, devotion, observation, and connection. It is the thread that ties past to present, individual to community, voice to silence. Worth thinking about is how writing is not only a tool, but a reflection of what humans value, whether food and trade, law and power, prayer and science, or simple connection across distance. The endurance of writing lies not in any one medium, but in its adaptability. Clay, papyrus, parchment, paper, and screen, all have served. Scripts have changed, alphabets reformed, tools replaced. Yet the gentle rhythm of writing continues. You might quietly observe that what matters is not the surface, but the act, the moment thought leaves the mind and takes visible form, resting where others can see. It is also calming to realize that writing is not static. It evolves with us, reflecting our needs. When communities were small, it counted grain. When empires rose, it codified law. When faith deepened, it preserved scripture. When curiosity expanded, it measured stars. And now, in digital times, it connects billions of people across the globe, carrying voices into shared spaces. The story of writing is, in a sense, the story of humanity learning to trust continuity. Oral memory fades, but written record endures. A mark carved thousands of years ago can still be read today. A letter sent centuries ago can still be unfolded. You may notice how gently this offers comfort. What is written does not vanish with the breath, but lingers, waiting to be remembered. In the quiet balance of symbols and stories, writing has always carried more than words. It has carried rhythm, patience, and the assurance of permanence. Whether in the curved lines of Sanskrit, the glyphs of the Maya, the print of Gutenberg, or the pixels of a screen, writing is a mirror of the human wish to be remembered, to connect, to endure. So, as we close this reflection, you can allow yourself to rest in the thought that writing is both ordinary and extraordinary. It is the shopping list and the sacred hymn, the casual note and the scientific formula, the poem whispered in love, and the treaty that holds peace. All of these, side by side, share the same calm medium. Letters, words, marks on a surface dot from symbol to story, from clay to cloud. Writing has been our companion. It has shaped civilizations, carried prayers, counted lives, measured stars, and connected hearts. Its endurance is gentle, its presence steady. And though the tools may change, the rhythm will remain. The quiet act of thought finding form, leaving a trace for others, and carrying the calm continuity of humanity forward. Thank you for sharing this peaceful time with the Sleepy BrainDose. May the calm rhythm of writing stay with you, bringing rest, curiosity, and gentle thought into your night. If this journey soothed you, we'd love a quiet like, a kind comment, and your subscription, so you can join us again for another soft exploration of science and sleep.